By now, you have the skills required to build a world for your game. Isn't that exciting? You can take your ideas and run wild with them, creating an immersive world one element at a time. A place that your players will enjoy exploring. As you develop your world, you may encounter a few pitfalls which can really take the fun out of this process. I know because I fell for them when I first started designing worlds. So in this lesson, we will cover each of these pitfalls and share guidelines that you can follow to make sure you channel your creativity in a healthy way. The first guideline is, the world is large. Your game will only explore a small part of it. So you shouldn't feel like you have to know everything about your world before you start running games in it. In fact, even if we could build everything before we started, that could actually make it more difficult to run games, because we don't know what our players are going to do ahead of time. So having some undefined parts can help us remain flexible and adapt our world in response to their decisions and interests. This is especially true in campaigns that span across many game sessions. So I invite you to cherish the idea that the world is large, to live intentional space for growth and discovery, and to remember that world building doesn't end when the first session begins. The next guideline is, follow the shiny. Start with the ideas that excite you the most. If you have an amazing idea that has to be a part of your world, add it in. What's the point of building a fantasy world if we can't put our wildest dreams in it? For example, let's say you're running a game in the city of Waterdeep, which exists in the Forgotten Realms setting of D&D. And you've had this rad idea of adding Ninja Turtles into the sewers. Because why not, right? It has Ninja Turtles now. That's simply a fact. But wait, are we simply going to add every idea we have into the world? Wouldn't that make it less consistent? That is a valid concern, because doing so could possibly damage our players' sense of immersion. But more often than not, you can have both. You can find a place for your shiny idea while keeping a coherent world. All you have to do is ask yourself the following 3 questions. Does my idea contradict any of the world's pillars? Are there any existing elements that can be tied to this new one? And finally, can I think of new elements that will support this idea? Let's answer these questions using our example. Question 1. Does the idea of Ninja Turtles contradict any of the world's pillars? What do you think? I think Ninja Turtles definitely fit in with one of D&D's core pillars, the world is magical. So we don't need to change anything. If that weren't the case, I wouldn't necessarily drop the idea outright. Instead, I'd ask, what do we need to change, remove, or add to accommodate it? Okay, let's move to the next question. Are there any existing elements that can be tied to our Ninja Turtles? The answer to that heavily relies on the work we've already done. If we've developed other factions within Waterdeep, we can think of ways to tie them to our Ninja Turtles. I can think of at least one criminal organization who would reasonably have Ninja Turtles among their members. But maybe we want them to be a faction of their own. Well, that brings us to the third question. Can we think of new elements that will support the idea of Ninja Turtles? Like we just mentioned, a faction of Ninja Turtles is a very cool idea. We can go ahead and develop their motivations, activities, and faces. We can also think of a location like an underground dojo where they train, or come up with events tying them to other factions in the city, like quarrels they had with the Xanathar or the Zentarim. By asking these questions, we have added Ninja Turtles into the world, while maintaining consistency and coherence. The next guideline is, beware of overbuilding. Overbuilding is when a GM burns out during building process. It's usually a product of extensive development in which GMs are diving into every detail no matter how minuscule. And I get it. It can be difficult to determine how much you need to develop your world before you're ready to run your game in it, especially when you start GMing. You might fear that you won't have enough material to run your game, and that fear often leads us to ride until exhaustion. Ironically, this could mean the game never starts. So how do we prevent overbuilding? We do that by remembering that the goal of the world we build is to run a game in it. So set a deadline for the first session. The next guideline can also help with the problem of not knowing how much you need to develop your world. And it's a simple idea, really. When in doubt, start small. You don't need hundreds of lore pages to run a game. You can start a fantastic campaign with a small village, 2 other locations, 2 or 3 factions, and 1 important event. Everything else you can add later in the campaign. and chances are your players won't even notice it wasn't there to begin with. Keeping these guidelines in mind will help you avoid the most common pitfalls of world building and channel your creativity in a healthy way. In the next lesson, we'll summarize everything we've learned in the world building chapter and set you on the path to build incredible worlds of your own.